Welcome to College Smart Radio, helping you bring into focus the true cost of college and how to tackle the runaway cost of financing a college education. College Smart Radio is hosted by Beatrice Schultz, a certified financial planner and founder of Westface College Planning. Now, here's your host for College Smart Radio, Beatrice Schultz.
Hi, I'm Beatrice Schultz. Welcome to our weekly show, College Smart Radio, where we help you tackle the runaway costs of a college education. Our show is all about bringing up-to-date and practical advice to parents who are dealing with the cost of a college education for their kids. With a private school costing up to $60,000 a year, a UC costing close to $35,000, and a California State University running $25,000, parents need more help than ever. We bring you that help by sharing ways to pay less, tapping into financial aid, and prioritizing your source of funds to make sure you get through the most expensive years of your life. Based on my own education and experience, I share my insights with you week in and week out. I hold a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering and a Master's degree in International Business. I'm a certified financial planner and the owner of the San Carlos-based college planning business, Westface College Planning. I host workshops on college planning and consult with parents on a daily basis. In addition to my insights, I bring in experts in many areas of the college process, from counselors, financial aid officers, student coaches, parents, and even students. You'll learn firsthand the ins and outs of how to pay for college and survive financially. In addition to our show, you can find lots of powerful information at our website, www.collegesmartradio.com. We have many articles that I've authored with up-to-date information on navigating the waters of paying for the runaway cost of college. We have a monthly e-newsletter full of content about college planning. We also have posted a glossary of key terms used in the world of college planning. Terms like total cost of attendance, FAFSA, student assets, base year, and so forth. And we have a link to our free community parent workshops that I host to teach parents about how to pay for college and how the financial aid system really works. So let's get started on today's show. It's not uncommon for the parents of college students to consider buying a home near their child's college for the student to live in while in college. The thought is that the child can live in the unit during college for less than paying rent. So is this a good strategy? A good college cost-saving financial decision? On today's show, we'll talk about the financial and the emotional reasons why this may be a good plan for some families. My guest on today's show is Mark Guthrie. Mark Guthrie has been on the show before. He's my husband and also my partner at Westface Financial and Insurance Services. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Mark works with clients in his retirement financial planning practice that deal with a lot of the choices, like decisions to buy a second home that your child might live in. And he faces every day, like I do with my clients, talking about the financial as well as the emotional aspects of buying a home when the kids are in college and what are the pros and cons about it.
Yep, we run across it all the time. Parents are looking for ways to manage the cost of college, and the rent versus buy discussion often comes up. It's a very similar analysis to somebody looking at a rent versus buy scenario, maybe for their primary residence or for a temporary residence they're going to be in while they're relocating to a different city. So we've run lots of analysis for parents to help them understand the cost of paying rent for student housing versus the idea of buying student housing or a small condo, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo, for example, and renting to a few other roommates, as well as having your child live in that condo for the 3 or 4 years that they're attending their university.
Well, Mark, let's talk a little bit about the financial, and then we'll talk a little about the emotional, their life lesson objectives. So let's start with the financial objectives. The financial objective, I guess the basic one, is that it's going to be a less expensive option than the child renting while in college. So let's talk about the finances of what it'll cost.
Sure. If we look at a lot of parents who are having kids in school, it's pretty typical that kids will spend the first year in the dorms. And I think you've talked on your show before about the cost of dormitories and food plans and things like that. But typically after that first year, those kids are pretty interested in getting out of the dorm and living in an apartment or a condo with a couple of buddies that they made during their time in the dorms. So I think it's a fair analysis to look at a 3-bedroom type of situation to buy a condo or a small house to compare having your child live in a small house or a 3-bedroom condo. And I guess the rents that I hear most often parents talk about outside of the major metropolitan areas tends to be about $500 per month per bedroom. And I hear that number a lot. Obviously, if your child's going to USC and they're living somewhere in Los Angeles or UCLA, or they're going to Stanford, those rents are going to be different. It might be $500 a month per bedroom, but there might be 3 people in each bedroom. But if you're going to a San Luis Obispo, maybe somewhere down in San Diego, anywhere in the valley, certainly anywhere in northern Sacramento or Chico or any of the coastal cities other than maybe Santa Barbara, that's a pretty common rent. And if you work your way around the western United States, I think that's also a pretty common rent if you're in Eugene, Corvallis, somewhere up in Washington or even in Arizona. So I think that's a pretty fair benchmark to use for a rent. So if we look at a child who's going to be going to school, and let's pick I hate to say a worst case scenario, but a typical scenario where a child actually takes 5 years to get through their 4-year program. We tend to see that a lot these days. So let's just look at 4 years. Let's assume they spend the first year in the dorms, and then the next 4 years they spend inside some housing outside of the dorms. So just the math, if they pay $500 a month, and assuming that they have to pay the rent all year. I've heard some students say, I only have to pay it for 9 months or 11 months or 12. But most I think I hear is that students have to pay the full year in order to get the good places around campus, close to campus, to be able to live in private housing. So let's assume $500 a month, 12 months, and over 4 years, with a little bit of inflation in there, about 3% a year, the cost of that to a parent, rent alone, would be approximately $25,000. That's going to be the price tag for 4 years.
Okay, well, I think that's probably that's a good estimate about what people do spend in rent, and that's definitely what I'm also hearing from. In fact, I had Jordan Ellison on here for University of Nevada in Reno, and that's about what she was spending per month on rent. I liked using those numbers. Obviously, utilities aren't going to be a factor in this comparison because you're going to be paying for utilities whether you live in the place or whether you rent the place. So the other factors we're going to be looking at are going to be how much you have to spend to buy a home. And I was reading some articles in the paper, and Coldwell Banker actually reports a report that says, looking at college towns, some of these college towns actually you can buy in some of the smaller Midwest and southern state towns. You can buy a 3-2 for $100,000. We're not going to see that in California. But obviously, if you're in Palo Alto or Los Angeles, you might be spending over $1 million for the same place. So let's use the kind of $300,000 as a number for what it would cost to buy a 3-2.
Sure. So let's look at that. So on one side, we've got one student, maybe your student, paying $500 a month, 4 years, that's $25,000. And if we're looking at a 3-bedroom place where we're talking about 3 kids inside the unit, then you're really kind of a gross income from a rental perspective is close to $75,000, just $25,000 times 3. So if we look at a $300,000 house, you can go out and buy that today, or a condo. You can go out and buy that today, and you're probably going to want a mortgage, and you are going to likely need to put at least 20% down. You might want to put more, although I wouldn't recommend it. Let's not put too much principal into this program. So let's say we write a check for $60,000 and get ourselves into a $300,000 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo. So what's that mortgage going to be like? Well, everybody knows there's lots of choices when it comes to mortgages out there. And this isn't a mortgage show, but we could talk for hours, of course, on topics on strategies around mortgages. But let's keep it simple. Let's say our parents want to keep the payments low. So they're going to go for a 5-year, 7-year, interest-only adjustable rate mortgage. Now, why might that make some sense? Because they're probably not going to own this property longer than 4 years or 5 years. So if we do see some inflation in the future, the fact that they've only got a rate lock for 5 or 7 years wouldn't impact their strategy. So let's try to keep the payment low. We're going to be buying this as a second home or a rental property, and it's going to be probably somewhere in the interest rate area of around 3.5%. Now, if you get a lower rate, fantastic. If it costs you 4.5%, frankly, it doesn't move the numbers that much because we're not really talking about a huge loan here. We're talking about $240,000. So if we did have that $240,000 mortgage over 4 years at 0.5% interest only, the monthly payment is $700 a month. Not a very big number. But if we look at that monthly payment times 12 times 4, it's going to be about $33,000, actually $33,600 in interest payments over those 4 years. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the cost of the mortgage. But of course, we're not done there yet, right? Because we've got property tax that we need to pay. If we're a renter, we don't pay the property tax. The landlord has to worry about that. But now we are the landlord, so we got to worry about it. So let's just take a simple 1% property tax. That's going to be on our $300,000 property about $3,000 a year. And if we're going to be doing that for 4 years, that's $12,000. So we got $33,000 in mortgage. We got $12,000 in property tax. Now, we're probably going to be required, and we're going to want some insurance on this place. I hear some pretty wild parties go on in these places. So we're going to definitely want some good homeowners insurance on our property because, slips and falls happen late nights in college towns pretty frequently. So with that, let's look at insurance. Well, let's say it's about $50 a month or maybe $600 a year. So if we add that up over 4 years with a little bit of inflation, we're at about $2,500 for insurance. Now, we got a few more to go through, but I think what we want to do first is take a quick relief here, and then we'll come back in just a minute.
You're with us on College Smart Radio, where my guest today is Mark Guthrie from Westface Financial. We all know that college is expensive and will most likely be some of the most costly years for a family. Understanding how to navigate the college costs to save everywhere you can is a really smart thing to know. And to help families beyond this radio show, I host community workshops around the Bay Area several times a month that explain the cost of various colleges, how the financial aid system works, and things to consider to prepare yourself for this tremendous expense. You can find my workshop schedule at collegesmartradio.com. We're going to be right back with Mark Guthrie on College Smart Radio, talking about does it make sense to buy your child a house while they're a student at college. We'll be right back.
For more information on today's topic, visit collegesmartradio.com or call area code 650-587-1559. College Smart Radio continues in moments on AM 1220 KDOW. Contact Beatrice Schultz at collegesmartradio.com or call area code 650-587-1559. Now, back to College Smart Radio with your host Beatrice Schultz on AM 1220 KDOW.
Welcome back to College Smart Radio, where we help you tackle the runaway costs of college. I'm Beatrice Schultz. I'm talking with my guest, Mark Guthrie, about the pros and cons of buying real estate for your student to live in well in college. Mark, we were just talking about the financial aspects, and maybe you can recap the financial discussion before we go on and talk a little bit about the emotional and life lesson objectives.
Sure. Yeah, we were talking about a student going to a school, paying about $500 a month in rent, and we're looking at a student that maybe would be doing that for 4 years. So that's going to be a cost in rent of around $25,000. We were trying to compare that to a $300,000 3-bedroom, 2-bath, small home or condo that parents might buy with a plan to own for 4 years and provide their child with some life lessons that we're going to talk about in a minute, but also maybe be a little bit better financially than actually paying rent. So we just went through a quick example of a mortgage of $240,000, which drives about $33,600 a year in interest cost if we do an interest-only loan. Property tax, about $12,000 over those 4 years. Insurance, $2,500. And of course, we're probably going to have some kind of homeowners association fee. If we're in a condo, we're definitely going to have it. If we're in a house, we might not have it, but we're going to be spending money on gardening and maintenance and things like that. So if we just look at $200 a month as a budget item for a homeowners association fee, and we look at that over 4 years with a little bit of inflation, that's about $10,000. Don't worry about the math. I'll add it up for you here. But the fifth thing we need to worry about, of course, is we're going to sell the property, and that's when we're going to pay the real estate fees. So let's just assume that our $300,000 purchase accumulated and appreciated zero over those 4 years. We didn't make any money. We didn't lose any money on the sale of the house, and we sell it for $300,000. Well, you know how it works. We're probably going to pay about 6% in closing fees or realtor fees to get that thing sold. So we're looking at about $18,000 there. If you add it all up, it totals approximately $75,000. That would be the cost of ownership of this $300,000 condo over 4 years. But remember that we would be charging 2 roommates of our child or our children to live there. And so if those kids needed to spend that same amount of money over that period of time, the rental income of $500 for each one of them would be, over 4 years, about $50,000, which makes sense because we said our child would have to pay $25,000 and we got 2 kids paying us rent, that's going to be $50,000. So if you look at it, and our house cost us $75,000, $76,000 over 4 years, and we were able to make $50,000 in rent, guess what? Our out-of-pocket cost is right at that $25,000, which is what it would have been had we paid rent to somebody else. So it's no mistake that the math worked out that way. We kind of backed into the $300,000 condo to make that make sense, just to give you a rule of thumb. If it's $500 a bedroom and there's 3 of them, then $25,000 if you rent, $25,000 if you own. But of course, if you can get a condo for $150,000, then it might be advantageous. If you've got to spend $750,000 for that condo and you're still only getting $500 a bedroom, terrible deal. Don't do it. But that is generally a rule of thumb I think you can look at in today's economy to get a feel for where your break even might be.
We really think about this number, trying to figure out the break even, because if you just Google this topic on the internet, you're going to see all sorts of articles, everything from there's no way you can break even or make money based on the fact that you're keeping it for a short amount of time, but you could break even if the numbers work. But the other end of that spectrum is the market's at its lowest point, real estate's going to go up, this is a great appreciation play. Well, it's tough to be sure that this is going to be a great appreciation play when you've only got 4 or 5 years to work on. So from a financial perspective, if you go in thinking, how can I make it break even, then it might make sense to you, especially if the emotional or life lessons part of it makes sense, is going to add up. And obviously, this strategy is only going to work if you've got a child that has it together. So not a child that's practical, has some street smarts, has good communication skills, and is interested in being a part of this project. Then that can be a good starting point.
Yeah, because your child is going to be your property manager. Assuming this unit is in a different town than where you live, you're going to be introducing the child to be the property manager. And if they're a brilliant artist but lose their car keys 8 out of 9 days, then they're probably not the person you want to try this strategy with. But if they're a finance major, they're a political science major, they're practical, a little bit of street smarts, they can communicate with other kids, hey, they could be perfect for this strategy.
And even the practicalness of doing some of the home improvements themselves, or knowing how to know what's even going wrong if they have plumbing problems. So all those are going to be important factors when you look at your own child to say, hey, is this a good idea for our family?
I think also there's a lot of life lessons that can be introduced to kids. If in your parenting, this is the time in life you want to try to help them understand what it's going to be like to be out on their own, it is a very powerful strategy in a controlled environment to start teaching kids about the responsibilities of everyday life. And if they're going to be the ones who need to collect rent from their roommates, to pay bills, to balance a checkbook related to that particular property, to make calls to Roto-Rooter in the middle of the night when the toilet backs up, whatever the duties are that they're going to have to deal with in this situation, those are going to be great life lessons when they get out of college and go live on their own.
And even those tough decisions of, okay, the rent, my roommate hasn't paid the rent yet, but I've got to pay the bills, so what do I do? Even in choosing who those roommates are going to be, you may not. The responsible student that knows they're responsible for these things is not going to necessarily be picking the funnest, biggest, party guy who's going to make sure that all the good people show up at their home party.
Yeah, they'll probably learn how to run credit checks on people by the time they're a sophomore in college, and that's not a bad thing.
And the other parts of the quality of life when we think about from a parent's perspective, or I should say quality of life from a parent's perspective as opposed to life's lessons for the student is, I mean, the parent can help in picking a place that's safe for their student. They can choose to make sure that there are new locks on the doors and windows. You don't know how many people have lived in that home before if you're renting it. You can really control the environment a lot more and you could feel better about where your student's going to be living.
I think that's probably one of the number one concerns that I hear when I talk to parents who have kids in college is, I just want them to be safe. And I hear that over and over again. And I like the idea of owning a property and controlling that safety aspect. You could install a series of cameras where you can watch what's going on in the house on the phone. You can install an alarm system for $20, $50 a month. That would add some extra security, especially if you've got girls and you've got a girl who's going to college. That's a big concern because you want her to be safe, and this is the first time she's out of her home and out of her neighborhood that she grew up in. So it can be very reassuring to parents to know that their kids are in a nice, secure, safe place when they come home and study and go to sleep at night.
There's no question about that. The other concern that I often hear from students and their parents, or really from parents about their students' first year or second year in college, is concern over the roommates not being ideal. So that's another area that you have control of. You can choose the student can choose who their roommates are going to be. And you could even choose to say, hey, let's just do a month-to-month lease if there's enough demand to say, let's try out the roommates. And if they don't work out, we're going to get a new roommate.
Sure, that's probably the number one complaint where kids are calling their parents. It's not my classes are too hard. I don't like the dorm food. It's, you wouldn't believe my roommate. They either never leave, or you don't complain if they're never there, but they never leave, or they smoke and I didn't know that, or they party a lot, or they've got a boyfriend or girlfriend that's over all the time. Who knows? The kids need to learn how to figure out these things. But if you're in a situation where you don't have any flexibility or control around that apartment and you've got 3 kids who are all doing individual leases with the landlord, your child's not going to have no say or power over who else is inside that environment. And you might end up really having a lot of problems, and it might be a no-brainer financial decision to basically have somebody on a month-to-month, even if you can't get another student in, and 3 or 4 months into the year, tell one student, hey, you're out. And the parent might say, hey, I'll forego 6 months of rent until I find somebody else just to get that crazy kid out of my child's living environment. So there's definitely some control there that can be very influential if you owned a place.
And as long as you're a student or you feel comfortable that the student's going to make those right choices, which is going to be part of your decision about whether you would want to buy something anyways, it's going to be give that student and you as a parent emotionally just a much better feeling of stability than the unknown of your child so far away and you don't even really know where they're living and what their environment's like. So let's talk a little bit more about the emotional impact for the kids and the parents. One of the things that I think about, or also is kind of, I guess, emotional, is the whole idea of you have to move out every year, which is not uncommon with students, or they have to leave their stuff over the summer, and the kind of temporariness of every year finding a new place to live. I think that takes away that. The other thing is I think it keeps a bond between the parent and the student because it's a great conversation piece about the management of the property, which can be emotionally kind of an awesome way for the parent to keep in touch with the student.
Yeah, I hear a lot from parents that their kids go to school. They hear a lot from them in the first year when they're in the dorms. Then they grow up a little bit and they get out and they get the second year going and they're living in some apartment or house somewhere and they kind of drop off the radar. You know, you're coming home for Easter. Yeah, crickets. You don't hear anything, or you got to go on Facebook and see what your kids are doing. And I think it's tough for parents to learn how to change their relationship with their kids as they go from living in the house and seeing them every day to being young adults now out on their own. It can be a tough transition. Now, I don't think it's a reason alone to do it, but I have heard parents say who have this strategy, it's really fun because I'm now talking to my son or my daughter in a very different way than I ever have. We're talking about our joint project, which happens to be this rental property. And we're having adult-to-adult conversation about business-type topics. And that's pretty powerful. That's pretty exciting for parents to see their kids flower and blossom into young adults and have these kinds of conversations. So this strategy can enforce or create that relationship where it wouldn't be created otherwise.
And as a recap to this, the whole topic on this show, from a financial perspective, when we just did the quick math, which says if you could buy a place for $300,000, you could get an interest-free loan for, was it 3.5% you used, Mark?
Yeah.
For 3.5%. And with basic expenses of what we would expect, If you could get $500 a month in rent from two other students, you probably could break even from a financial perspective. And obviously, there's opportunity to do a little bit better or a little bit worse, depending on what happens with the real estate market and if you have any unexpected expenses. And then from the emotional perspective, it can be a great experience or a not great experience. It's going to matter what your kid is all about. Mark, I really appreciate you coming on my show today. I think this was a great topic, and hopefully it'll give some families some thoughts about what they think.
Yeah, I think it's so important to always combine emotion and finance. They're never separated. So we did it here, and I look forward to more conversations along these lines in the future.
Thanks, Mark. That wraps up another weekly show of College Smart Radio. We hope you picked up some new information today that helps you figure out ways to manage the runaway costs of college. You can hear us each week here on KDOW Saturdays at 3 p.m. We promise to bring you up-to-date information from the front lines of helping parents deal with the most expensive years of their lives. Again, this is Beatrice Schultz. Thanks for tuning into College Smart Radio, and we look forward to sharing more helpful information with you next week.
Information presented during today's show is not to be construed as advice meeting the particular needs of any investor. All mention of performance is based on historical experience. It should not be assumed that past performance is any indication of future results. Tax and or legal advice is not offered by Mark Guthrie. Please consult with your tax professional for additional guidance regarding tax-related matters. Mark Guthrie is a registered representative with the ON Equity Sales Company, member FINRA SIPC, and an independent advisor representative through the ON Investment Management Company. Mark Guthrie is also licensed to offer insurance and annuities in California, Oregon, Nevada, and Connecticut. Beatrice Schultz is not affiliated with the ON Equity Sales Company. You've been listening to College Smart Radio with certified financial planner Beatrice Schultz. If you have questions on today's topic, log on to collegesmartradio.com or call area code 650-587-1559. That's 650-587-1559. Join us next week at this time for another edition of College Smart Radio on AM 1220 KDOW.